Hello, ma'am. Good morning. From ID Body. From ID Body. I was student ID Body 2062. Rural technologies. No, no, no. He did with us and yeah, 30 something. That's here on the watching law. Yes, unfortunately, so yesterday I was talking, and I so you need and I talked to the number of people who had around like from agencies I to work for but in the and also I have studied labor market from yes. No, I'm currently working with the bridge. We are, I'm as a media developer. Yes, they have done it. We did call for the whole food service commission. Yes.
Hello, 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 hello,
Yes,
hello.
this is one of kind of things that people actually yes. The exclusive is kind of this is start. Maybe we can do something else. Kind of some of them we also got kind of outside. But then yes. Right. We like somebody also going up to the then what you do, you work on the thing that you can then you get private every activity. Yeah, but then after that, right. Yes. Yes. Effectiveness, Yogi building around design. But there's some many based on all the things that they did.
মাৰ্কাৰ আছে।
Good morning. How's this day?
Good, yeah, not much sleep. Yeah, okay. We're still on UK time. The last 2 nights, I've had 3 hours sleep. Sleep at 3 in the morning, wake at 6 in the morning. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Okay.
Where do you sleep? See, you have asked me again.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello.
Pain management হয়ে গেছে। উনি এখানে
He's Dr. Om. He's one of our students.
おでですか？おでですか？Hello, hello. あ、おで。
the same time as so for science. Just do a quick brief, 5 minute.
Yeah, you got to hello. 46. Dikkat böyle bir şey var.
আপোনাৰ সায়েন্স এণ্ড টেকনলজিত আছে, তাৰপিছত আপোনাৰ মেডিচিনৰ আৰু এটা হ'ল আপোনাৰ তাৰ কোন বলে আমাক মানে
সব ডিপার্টমেন্টে
টিমবোৰ মানে বহুত এৰিয়া কিছুমান টিম হিচাপে লৈ হেডবিলাকক এটা এটা এতিয়া আমাৰ গোটেই মানে এইটো উইণ্টাৰ ব্ৰেকৰ ভিতৰত চলিছিলে আমি ব্ৰেকখিনি ভিতৰৰ পৰা প্ৰথমে আহিব লাগিব আছে আৰু আৰ্ট এণ্ড লিটাৰেচাৰটো অসমীয়া ডিপাৰ্টমেণ্টৰ হোটেল অসমীয়াৰ কাৰণে ভাল, বড়োৰ কাৰণেও ভাল সেইটো ভাল। তাৰপিছত পিছ এণ্ড কনফ্লিক্ট সেইটোতো আৰু মানে নাপালে পলিটিকেল চাইন্সে নাপাইছিলে গতিকে আমি মানে এনভাইৰমেণ্টেল লিটাৰেচাৰ পেপাৰ পঢ়াওঁ আৰু আমি লিটাৰেচাৰত বহুত বস্তু এনভাইৰমেণ্টেলৰ কথা আজিকালি সোমাব চেষ্টা কৰি কৰিছোঁ কম গতিকে মানে এইটো ল'লোঁ আমাৰ এনভাইৰমেণ্টেল ওপৰত চেমিনাৰ গতিকে ডিপাৰ্টমেণ্টৰ মানুহখিনি চব অলপমান ফ'কাছ হৈ আছে যিটো আমাৰ লিটাৰেচাৰ
एकदम totally opposite with 12% girls in Utah. It's a introduce one in a
কিন্তু বাকী এৰাউণ্ড 45 ছোৱালী মানে ভাল ভাল খেলিবলৈ এপ্লাই কৰা নাছিল আৰু বহুত মানে গ্ৰেজুৱেলি চেঞ্জ হ'ব ধৰিছে মই এতিয়ালৈকে যে মই চাৰিজন স্কলাৰ নিজৰ বা আমাৰ যদি বহুত হেৰি আৰু কিছুমানে আগতে অনলাইন ক্লাছ কৰিলোঁ কোভিডৰ ফাৰ্ষ্ট ষ্টেজটো যোৱাৰ পিছত আকৌ আমি এডমিশ্যন
Every year, হয় নেকি? 2 years হয়।
আমাৰ ডিচেম্বৰ নৱেম্বৰৰ পৰা ডিচেম্বৰৰ এডভাৰটাইজ হয় নতুন বছৰত এবাৰ
আপোনালোকৰ যিটো advertisement দিয়ে ন, এতিয়া মোক অলপমান connection কৰিছে। Students in futures can apply কৰা নাই।
যোৱা বছৰলৈকে আৰু যিটো বছৰত আমাৰ ভাল আমাৰ ডিপাৰ্টমেণ্টত লাগিব চাকৰি পালে যিকেইজন দেখি আছে উপকৃতভাৱে চলি আছে আমাৰ আৰু এনেই বাকী বহুতকেইটা ডিপাৰ্টমেণ্টত এছ'চিয়েট কৰি আছে আৰু খালী থকাৰ কাৰণে আমাৰ লগত একেলগে জইন কৰা কিছুমানে এপ্লাই কৰিব পাৰে কিন্তু আমাৰ ডিপাৰ্টমেণ্টত নাই আমাৰ ডিপাৰ্টমেণ্ট প্ৰফেচৰ পষ্টত মানে সেইটো ৰাইট মানে প্ৰফেচৰ পষ্টত এপ্লাই কৰিব এডভাৰটাইজমেণ্ট হৈছিল আগত এপ্লিকেণ্ট নাছিলে আচলতে প্ৰফেচৰ লেভেল পোৱালৈকে মানুহ এজনী
Good morning. I request all the students to take their seats. We will be starting the session within a while. Students standing at the back are requested to come and take their seats. Good morning, all. May I have your attention, please? Uh, Today we have a panel discussion on climate justice and action, and today is also the last day of this Knowledge Festival event. And I welcome all of you to this panel discussion today. We have 6 speakers for the panel discussion. I'll introduce to them one by one, and I will request them to come over to the stage. We have with us a very eminent historian, a critic, a writer, a novelist, a Padma Shri Award winner, Mr. Arup Kumar Datta. He will be chairing the session today. He is an Indian author, freelance journalist, a social commentator based in Assam. He writes short fiction, long fiction, fiction, non-fiction, newspaper editorials, articles, columns, satirical pieces, etc. for adults and adventure novels for young people. In the 5-decade-long career, he has authored 35 books, including the Anagarika's Swan Song, published in 2009, The Bag, 2018, The Brahmaputra, which is one of his most important works, Unicorns, Cha Garam, the Tea Story, The Roving Minstrel, The Kaziranga Trail, one of his earliest fictions for the children, The Blind Witness, and many others. He has received numerous awards, including Shankar's Award, Kamal Kumari National Award, AWIC Lifetime Achievement Award, and he has also been awarded DLIT by Dibrugarh University in 2018 and also by Guwahati University in 2020. In 2018, he was conferred the Padma Shri by the government of India. Now, may I request him to come to the dais and take his seat. I request our student Padmaja Roy to felicitate our guest with Aronai. We also have a small gift pack for him, a bag, a cup, from Bodoland University and an overcoat. I would like to invite our first panelist, Professor Peter Newell. We have already introduced him yesterday in the previous session. He is a professor of international relations at the University of Sussex and co-founder and research director of the Rapid Transition Alliance. His recent research focuses on the political economy of low-carbon energy transitions, but he has undertaken research, advocacy, and consultancy work on different aspects of climate change for over 25 years. We are very fortunate to have him here with us. I request our student Krishna Sarkar to welcome him with an RNI. We have a very eminent journalist among us here today. She is Rupa Chennai Madam, and she is a senior investigative journalist. She has been in this career for the past 30 years and she has been working in Northeast India. And based on her experiences, she has authored the book Understanding Northeast India. Her area of research is public health and development. I welcome you, ma'am, to the panel discussion. I request our student Nikita Chakraborty to welcome ma'am with an RNI and a gift bag. Our next panelist is Dr. Anamika Borua. She is a professor at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. And she is a visiting faculty in the Asian Institute of Technology, Bangkok. Trained in ecological economics, her research interest lies in understanding how political, social, and economic factors shape environmental decisions and change, particularly related to water. I welcome ma'am. I request our students Niharika and Ruth to welcome her with an RNI. Our next panelist is Mr. Jay Patra. Hello, sir. Mr. Patra is a resourceful and result-driven practitioner with more than 12 years work experience in knowledge generation, synthesis, translation, and engagement for more evidence-informed policy and program decisions in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Cambodia. He has strong understanding of research and evidence use and uptake and facilitated successful multi-stakeholder partnerships and cross-sectoral collaboration on issues of environment, sustainability, resilience building, and social inclusion. Sir is also familiar with the geographical space of Bodoland because he has been working here for some time, and we are very fortunate to have him here with us. And I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce him as my contemporary during my PG days at JNU in New Delhi. So he was my contemporary, and he has scaled a lot in these years. I welcome you. I request our student Joyshri Haloi to welcome Mr. Patra with RNI and gift bag. have a very important guest today from Bhutan, and we would be very fortunate to learn from him that how Bhutan is a carbon negative country and is contributing to the world in many ways. He is no other than Dr. Om Katal from Royal University of Bhutan. He is currently working as a lecturer at the Department of Environment and Climate Studies. Dr. Katal is a focal person from RUP for Least Developed Countries, Universities Consortium on Climate Change, RUP representative for Swiss Next India, and countries representative to IPCC. Currently, Dr. Katal is a postdoctoral research fellow at Grassroots Institute, Canada. I welcome him to our session. I request our student Krishna Sarkar to welcome Dr. Katal with Ronai and a gift bag. So we have very illustrious persons in our panel today. I hope our students, our audience will learn a lot from their discussion and from their presentation. I now hand over the session to Arup Kumar Datta sir. I request him to chair the session and begin the panel.
Good morning, everyone. I am truly humbled by being asked to chair a panel that comprises of such illustrious members. I thank Borland University for giving me this opportunity. Now, this panel would be discussing sustainable energy solutions while protecting the planet from climate change. And the topic itself is environmental sustainability and clean energy. Now, we can make certain assumptions, I think, which will be commonly accepted. I don't think there will be any controversy about it. The first is that we all can proceed from the simple assumption that the invention of the steam engine, which enabled the so-called Industrial Revolution, which in turn enabled humanity to leapfrog into the so-called modern age, was the single biggest mistake that was ever made and is responsible for the mess planet Earth currently finds itself in. Now, among other points of unanimous agreement would be A, the reality of global warming and climate change. B, reality that the time for blame game and spouting cliches is over. And C, the reality that planet Earth has already crossed the tipping point. And I personally am somewhat cynical that we are going to be able to save the planet from the imminent apocalypse that would be coming in another, I think, by the middle of this century. Now, just to give you one example of this, that the reality planet Earth has already crossed the tipping point. I'll just give you one example, but I'm sure our experts will be will be familiar with many more. Now, you can recall that the 2016 Paris Agreement had the global community draw up a roadmap whereby global warming could be confined to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial temperatures through drastic cuts in industrial emission. Now, over 7 years later, as things stand, because of the failure of almost every nation to stick to this roadmap, experts opine that even if we increase the rate of emission cuts, we would not be able to prevent the average temperatures from crossing the 2 degrees Celsius mark by the end of the century. I'd like to have our expert panel's opinion on this. They point out that we are in danger of surpassing the carbon budget, which quantifies how much additional carbon can be pumped into the atmosphere before that goal of limiting warming to 1.5 goes beyond reach. Decades earlier than envisaged, the calculation is that with 2.4 trillion tons of climate warming carbon dioxide added to the atmosphere since the mid 1800s, the average global temperature has risen by 1.1 degrees centigrade, which leaves just 400 billion tons which can be added before the carbon budget is overshot. With global emissions currently totaling around 40 billion tons a year, it means the allocation will be crossed within a decade as opposed to the 3 decades targeted in the Paris Accord. Now, this is just one example of how much inaction on the part of various governments has put the kind of danger it has put the planet Earth in. And since you are mostly young people, you must remember and you must realize that all governments have self-interest in their mind when it comes to the environment. And I think it is up to you to arm twist each government, wherever you are, to try and give up this self-interest and act for the universal planetary good. Now, today I think our panelists, if possible, they should focus on one important aspect. You know, tackling climate change has to be both at the macrocosmic and microcosmic level. Now, at the macrocosmic level, let our Harta-Kartas, our so-called political bigwigs, do whatever they want. But I think we all can act at the microcosmic level. And as far as we are concerned, the microcosmic level is our northeast, which I tell you is one of the biggest and most beautiful places on the earth. It is our responsibility to devise ways in which we can contribute to the overall climatic welfare by adopting a proactive attitude at the microcosmic level. And I hope our distinguished panelists will keep this in mind. Just let me give you one example of the kind of environmental degradation that the North is being subjected to, and the kind of problem on the climate front that we are experiencing. For instance, a great part of a state famed for its abundant rainfall, with showers to some extent being experienced even in the winter months, has not had any significant amount of rain for almost 5 months now. We have had a prolonged drought period in Northeast that is unthinkable. Also, as previously reported in the regional media, East and Northeast India had recorded the warmest November and December in 2022 since 1901. According to the Indian Meteorological Department, IMD, the average temperature last December was recorded as 25.85 degrees Celsius for this region, higher than any for over a century, breaking even the 25.69 degrees Celsius recorded in December 2016. A study published in the Journal of the Royal Meteorological Society has shown that there has been a decrease of about 360 millimeter in annual accumulated rainfall over the Brahmaputra basin during 1998 to 2018. The average for the 2 decades being about 20%. Equally worrying was the discovery that the most significant decline in mean rainfall was found mainly over the wettest regions of the basin, such as Cherrapunji and Mawsynram. You all have heard of both these places. They are supposed to be the wettest places on earth. But now rainfall there is significantly declining. Now, Mawsynram and Cherrapunji in Meghalaya witnessed a decline of average annual rainfall about 500 millimeters during 1998, between 1998 and 2018, a deviation of about 20%. The paper made the grim foreboding that the changing temporal, geographic, and altitudinal characteristics of rainfall over the Brahmaputra basin may have far-reaching consequences. So this is again just one pointer to the fact that we as a microcosmic entity are facing both the impact of global warming and climate change. And finally, I'd be grateful if the distinguished panelists also harp upon one very important aspect. And that aspect is the need to create what are called eco-warriors, young eco-warriors or green warriors. I think if our planet is to be saved, it is up to young people like you who have to become warriors fighting on behalf of the planet. Please don't look up to the older generation to do this. You have to be very proactive. And I think the need for mass proactivism by eco-warriors is greater than ever. Now, finally, I'd like the distinguished panel to consider certain aspects. One is that this topic for this thing is clean energy. Now, clean energy, I presume, is energy gained from sources that do not release any pollutants, such as the examples of clean energy are solar power, wind power, tidal power, geothermal power, power derived from biomass, etc. But I think you may disagree or agree. Clean energy is not the same as green energy. The green energy derived from natural sources that are renewable but can cause some amount of environmental degradation. For instance, hydroelectric projects, which can result in deforestation and inundation, or nuclear energy, which has the potential to cause ecological disasters, such as the one in Chernobyl in Russia and Fukushima in Japan. Now, these are renewable forms of green energy, but are they clean energy? That is, I think, one point that you should give your opinion on in this session. Now, I won't say any more. I just want our panel to answer this question, whether humanity should proceed on simultaneous transition to clean as also green energy, despite the latter being environmentally inimical. So what is the role of green energy as opposed to clean energy? Should we combine both the two in today's our fight to prevent climate change and global warming? Anyway, I'm sorry I've taken up such a long time. Now I'll leave it to our distinguished panel to voice their opinions. Now we have among the panelists Professor Anamika Borua. Then we have Professor Peter Newell. We have Dr. Om Katel. We have Mr. Jay Patra. And we have also Rupa Chennai. May I request Professor Anamika Borua to give her views. Please keep your views to within 10 minutes. And after that, we'll open the session to the general audience. Thank you.
Well, we also have here with us Rupa Datta Madam. She is the better half of Arup Datta sir. We will also like to welcome her to our session. We'll welcome her with Arunay. I request our students Nikita and Paddoja to welcome ma'am to this program with Arunay. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chair, for setting the context so well. Can you just put it from the beginning? So I have very quickly, because only 10 minutes is there, so I will try to respond to the questions that you have raised through the quick presentation, bringing about how multi-level, cooperation is required if we are talking about any kind of, assessing any kind of energy, whether it is or any kind of security, water, food, or energy security. So I will just very quickly begin. Again, Chair has mentioned about it, about industrial revolution. So I would first like to show this diagram, this figure, which has been taken from IPCC 2022. And I would actually request all the students sitting here you must look into the reports of Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, because that is one report which has all the information related to what was happening, what is happening, and what is science talking about. So if you look at this particular figure, what you actually see, what is climate injustice, is that somebody who was born in 1940 would see a certain kind of temperature rise, and when the person reaches 80 years old, and a person who is born in 2020 would see another kind of temperature when he or she reaches 71 years. So which means that maybe in 1940, some kind of fossil fuel probably led economy was initiated, but probably the person who was involved may not see that kind of an impact, which would be probably seen by somebody who wasn't even a part of that decision. So this itself is something that we are arguing about, and we talk about historical emissions, which is basically being felt by each one of us. Probably many of us or many of the countries were not at all involved in those emission-led development or growth. So if you look at how does climate change actually matter is, if you look at the left side of the diagram, it basically talks about global level. So as mentioned, you need to do a lot at the micro level. What I want to emphasize is that if you do not really have the connect from the global, at times even your micro level management fails, because it's such a huge scale issue that just you and I alone can make a little difference, but it needs a cooperation at a very, very larger scale. So if you look at this diagram, what basically I'm trying to state here is that because of the fossil fuel-based economy, there was a negative externality, and that was climate change. Today, what you see as a climate change is a byproduct of a lot of production process that happened during the Industrial Revolution, and it has been happening for many, many years. As such, we have now two options. One is that you mitigate climate change, which means you make sure that climate change does not happen, which is a kind of an effort where we talk about going for renewable sources of energy, clean source of energy. But since it has been happening, and it happens at the global or national scale, probably you and I alone cannot at the micro level go for mitigation, but at the global and the national level, at a larger scale, you need to change your entire production process. Whereas adaptation happens mostly at the local scale, at the local level. Why adaptation is needed? Because it's not possible to withstand the impact of climate change, which is already there, as mitigation will show its effect only after a couple of years, or maybe after 20, 30, 40 years. Till that time, we have to survive. So how do you survive? You need to adapt to these changes. So which happens mostly at the local scale, and it helps to benefit the society to manage with the kind of impact. For example, heavy floods, drought, how do you adapt to those situations? Now, both of these are actually very strongly related to the concept of sustainable development or sustainable development goals. And I would like to tell you that why we failed and why climate change came up as a negative externality is also because we were not able to balance our economic growth with the environment. So there was environmental degradation, which is something also seen as a failure of development from a sustainable perspective, that what you did today will have an impact in the future. Now, there is another concept which is called loss and damage, which has been discussed a lot in the last COP. How is that, related? So just to again give you an example, mitigation at the global scale, if it is not happening the way it needs to happen, and many, as has just mentioned, Chair has mentioned, that mitigation is not actually happening in the way it should happen. The problem is that we have missed many of our goals, although countries at international level has given several commitments, but it seems that we may not be able to even reach 1.5 degree, we may overshoot 1.5 degree as well. But most important thing here is that even if we are able to keep our temperature within 1.5 degree, it is very clearly mentioned in the IPCC report that even at 1.5 global warming, the poorest people in the global south will be heavily impacted. So which means there is no way that you can escape the impact of climate change, and you have to adapt to these changes. But The problem is, if mitigation is not happening well, if we are not sticking to our commitments, there is a larger concern because you will have to adapt more. So if you are not mitigating well, your adaptation at the local level has to be very high because extreme events are going to be more frequent, which I think we have already witnessed in the last decade. Whereas even in the adaptation level, there are limits to adaptation. You can't keep on adapting. And there are hard limits and soft limits. Hard limit is something, say for example, you are trying to adapt for a particular agricultural land, but that land completely got eroded. So there is no point of adaptation there, it's not there. And soft limit is mostly related to socio-economic conditions, poor policy implementation, lack of funds, poor countries. For example, a country which has lesser GDP usually is in the path of deficit development. And as such, what you see is you finally end up with something called loss and damage for a community. So what is loss and damage? It's the residual of when you could not adapt. And just again to make it more explicit, what it shows here is climate change mitigation, inadequate climate mitigation, inadequate mitigation and adaptation plans. All of these together, if you look at this diagram on the right side, what it talks about is if your climate change would have happened perfectly the way it should have happened, the mitigation, then you would not be adapting. But since there is inadequate mitigation plus climate change adaptation, you are kind of trying to show that because of inadequate mitigation, I'm adapting. Then if you have inadequate mitigation plus inadequate adaptation, it ends up into something called dealing with loss and damage. So we are now in a situation where inadequate mitigation, as you can see, we are not able to stay up to our commitments. There is inadequate or limits to adaptation for both soft and hard reasons. And finally, we are ending up into a situation which is called losses and damage. Now, what do I mean by losses and damage? You can see from this, clippings of newspaper, where you see Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, all of these countries face tremendous amount of impact of, extreme events, particularly floods recently. And these are basically, in spite of having several attempts being made at the local level to adapt to climate change. And so the question comes, why are we still not able to manage? And this is the reason, because it is not possible for many countries who have limited resources to adapt to the extent that one can actually be completely resilient to these impacts. Now, I just want to very quickly bring in 2 points, as been mentioned also by the chair, is that what needs to be done here and what is the problem? See, for example, we are mostly talking about river basins which are transboundary in nature. Now, if suppose there is flood that happens in the Indian part of Brahmaputra, and if that information isn't reached on time to the downstream country, there is no way, even if you have the resources for the downstream country, to actually withstand the impact. Yesterday, we saw a very interesting presentation from a journalist from Bangladesh, and I was the entire time I was thinking that, how connected it is. I mean, what is happening in Bangladesh is, of course, related to what is happening in India as well. So if you look at this diagram, what I want to explain here is that if there is no international cooperation, if there is no understanding of sharing information and data within 2 countries which shares an international transboundary river basin, you cannot actually have a good policy at the national level because you don't have the information of a river basin which is shared by another country. What is happening upstream, you do not know. You may have whatever policy you are formulating, that policy may be good only if it is within country. And if you have a weak national policy, national adaptation policy or national policy to reduce loss and damage, again, will remain ineffective at the local level because similarly, it is inadequate because it does not take into account the entire story. So, if you have a good cooperation at multiple scale, you can actually reduce disaster, which will also reduce climate injustice. Similarly, if you have less cooperation, it is either way. Let me give you an example of the clean and green energy as was just now mentioned. See, why do we go for renewable energy? There are 2 reasons. One is we want to mitigate, it also helps you in adaptation because it helps you to secure water, food, and energy, in a way, because if suppose there is crisis, there is drought, you can help you, these kind of water infrastructure even helps you during the time of drought. Now, while you are going for something like a water infrastructure, and if you do not consider who benefits, who does not benefit, then it may look like that it is giving you a clean source of energy, water, food, energy security, and livelihood security of one section of the community has gone up, but there is an affected community whose food, water, energy security has actually gone down, livelihood security has actually gone down. And this is why you see so much of a problem today to even invest on a water infrastructure project, because there is this whole narrative around it that there is no doubt that the way impact assessments are done, you will be leaving out certain section of the society. And this becomes even more difficult when it is a transboundary law. At least within the country, you follow same rules, same law, same kind of legal kind of structure, which will help you to get justice. But if it is happening upstream and not downstream, the downstream country which does not have any information, it is going to, in fact, further enhance your, injustice. Now, clean energy, as very rightly mentioned, is important, but how green and how socially inclusive this energy are is something very important for us to understand. Just last quickly 2 slides. I have to be very vocal here to say that the problem is that our approach has been very technocratic and managerial. And while we have a very technocratic and managerial approach to mitigate climate change or adapt to climate change, what you actually overlook is the question of equity and justice. And this is not that I am saying, I have put in a lot of references. All of these papers are talking about the same thing. And there is unequal participation of a large number of groups of people. They are not even seen. Their voices are not even heard. We don't even know what they are facing. And there is no platform. And therefore, what you see is that one group of people have absolutely no role in the decision making, and somebody else is making decision for the water which they have access to. Given this, yesterday Peter already mentioned about this, there are actually very important 4 dimensions of climate justice, and they are not difficult if one understands these dimensions. The first is recognition justice. It means one has to recognize that there are societal structures. Everybody is not similar. We live in a heterogeneous society, and that heterogeneity has to be recognized when you are building your policies, which includes energy policies as well. Distributive justice. How do you ensure that who is getting benefited and who is getting affected by any intervention that you are making? You need to have that information in your hand. Procedural justice, where participation in decision making is very, very important. Some groups are usually excluded. Some individuals are usually excluded from decision making. How do you ensure that the procedure itself brings justice? And finally, restorative justice is something which is historically somebody has been, deprived of certain things. You need to make sure that how can you give them justice now when you are re-looking at your policy or you're building it better. So these are 4 points, and I'm going to stop here with a very interesting cartoon actually, where it shows that in COP27, we actually raise a toast officially that we will include loss and damage. But you see the countries who are also raising toast are already underwater. So somebody who is deciding, okay, we are going to include is much better off than one who is demanding that we should be included. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much.
Please come up. And
I have a small announcement to make. We have Dr. Arup Kumar Mishra. He was already here yesterday. We would like to request him to come to the dais and take his seat. And may I request our students, Krishna and Dr. Jha, to felicitate and welcome Dr. Mishra with the RO9. Thank you for joining us today again.
Thank you, and you had brilliantly brought out the complexity of the subject. I mean, it's not pure black and white, as I tried in my own talk to make it. I think it's far more complex than that. And she has also very correctly underlined or emphasized the reality that what is happening at the macro level is increasingly related or impacting upon the micro level. Also, she agrees with me, I think, that both the mitigation part of it has been inadequate, as well as the adaptation part that also has been inadequate in many cases, which is quite understandable. Yes, thank you so much for such a brilliant presentation. Now, may I request Professor Peter Nero here.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me at the back? Great. So it's a pleasure to be here again. So I just want to make a few brief remarks. I'll keep this presentation short. I'm afraid I have no slides either, so it's a low carbon presentation, apart from the hot air that I'm expounding right now. But the first point I want to make is about the need to think about the failure of imagination. Okay, because this is a key theme in this conference that we've been hosting here the last few days. What's the knowledge base for action? How do we try and move forward? And I think we're really struggling to find the solutions to try and move forward and to chart a climate-compatible pathway moving forward. And for me, that's a failure of the imagination, because there are so many solutions, so many technologies, so many solutions out there that people already have. And it's a question for me, I think, of trying to source those and scale them up and bring actors into the right spaces to make their voices heard more powerfully. So we need to move beyond what I'm going to call the climate of despair, because there are very many reasons to be very, very pessimistic. If you look at the scenarios, you look at the fact that we're unlikely to meet 1.5 degrees warming, and as I said yesterday, it's more likely to drift way past 2 degrees, and that the consequences of that are frankly catastrophic. So there's plenty of reasons to be absolutely full of despair. But what I want to talk about a little bit as well is what in the Rapid Transition Alliance, which is something I founded a few years ago, we call evidence-based hope. Okay, so we try and tell stories, we try and share stories, and we want to source stories. We want your story also about the possibility of rapid and socially just change. And that's across all sectors, because one of the key points I want to make today is that climate is related to everything else. We've just heard how it's related to water and food, and it clearly is. People often talk about the nexus between these different systems, so that you intervene in one part of the system and it has an effect elsewhere. You can't disentangle these things. It's part of a complex ecosystem. So we're trying to share stories of change about the possibility of rapid and socially just transitions in things like food and energy and water, finance and transport. And we're trying to do that looking back historically, because many of the challenges we face today, they feel unique, but we have faced similar challenges in the past. And so it's worthwhile looking at historical examples of when things have happened before. So at the moment, people often talk about the Green New Deal, right? We have a lot of conversations about this in the US, in the UK. People talk about a global Green New Deal. But we've had a New Deal before in the US, okay, under Roosevelt, which was charting a new way forward, trying to shift infrastructure, to create new jobs. So let's think about some of the historical examples that might be relevant to the predicament that we face now. But also around the world right now, there are examples of people facing these challenges, transitioning in positive and inclusive ways that we need to take account of. Because one of the reasons we don't have so much effective climate action is because people believe it can't happen. They don't see evidence of it. They don't believe that it can happen. So it's really important work for all of us, I think, to do to try and share this evidence-based hope that there are alternatives out there. And it's also a way of calling out inaction. You know, when governments say we can't possibly build community energy, we can't possibly allow people to produce their energy, we give them 10 examples of where people are doing precisely that. Where we say we can't use fertilizers in agriculture. You know, we can't do away with fertilizers. You show examples of where people have been using alternatives and lower input alternatives, etc. So that's my first point. Let's try and move beyond the climate of despair. But my second point, and it's related, of course, is about the need to think holistically, not just across water and energy and food, that's clearly important, so that one solution doesn't have a negative impact on someone else. So that when there's a move toward biofuels, for example, in Europe or the US, that it doesn't produce food riots elsewhere because there's competition for land. Or when we go, as India is about to, a big drive towards electric vehicles, you don't create a whole series of negative and extractivist mining conditions as we try and extract more minerals to produce car batteries. We need to think about these knock-on impacts across systems of food, water and energy. And we need to link the different aspects of climate change. Some people talk about climate-compatible development, things like climate-smart agriculture. And they often have three elements. Of course, it's about mitigation. How do we bring down the emissions? It's also about adaptation. How do we adapt to the inevitable effects of climate change on these systems? But it's also about poverty alleviation. So how can we think about what's sometimes called the triple wins? How can you score positively across all of those three areas? These are the sorts of things we need to do to think more synergistically and holistically, I think. And people often say, you know, what's your theory of change here? And I'm often wary of having one theory of change. I don't think there are magic bullets, but there is a complex ecosystem of change which is out there already. And I think the key challenge for all of us is to tap into that and find the right levers, the right intervention points. Because climate change means different things for different people, depending on their circumstances and where they live. But, you know, people are concerned about health, they are concerned about their jobs, they are concerned about energy security. And these are often the more immediate and more direct entry points for the conversations about how to move change forward more effectively. So it's inevitably about individual change and system change. The things you and I can do every single day when we make choices about how we transport, about how we walk or cool our homes. But it's also about mobilizing and engaging politically, because that's how we'll get the sort of system change that's required. And of course, there are moments of disruption which enable us to rethink these things. And the COVID crisis, which was terrible on so many fronts, did force us to rethink ideas about work and about transport and about the priorities around which we organise our societies. So in my own country, for example, industries that one day were making vacuum cleaners, the next day were making respirators for hospitals, or companies that were making beer started using their alcohol for sanitizer. And so sectors and businesses shifted their whole business model very, very quickly. So we're often told our businesses move slowly, they can't adapt quickly. They can. When the motivation and the will is there, they can. And you know, we can do that. We need to learn from some of these lessons. So however horrific that crisis was, it showed that we can innovate. The state does have power. It can protect people. It can shift things in a more positive direction. So that's my second point. My third one is really about justice. So just going back to the last slide there, really, the need to centre justice, because there will be no transition, there will be no transformation unless justice issues are hardwired into how we handle this problem. And partly it's about the procedural dimension that we just heard about, getting people's voices involved in the process. And this is vital, otherwise people will resist new infrastructures or projects, rightly so. So you need to have that procedural element, getting those actors on board. But there's also the distribution element, making sure that the poorest people aren't the ones that suffer the worst consequences, either of climate change itself or the responses to climate change. My next point really is about getting to the source of the problem, and this is a little bit what I talked about yesterday, and I was going to say a bit more about it. One of the things I work on is supply-side climate policy, is what it's called. And these are policies to try and leave fossil fuels in the ground increasingly. Obviously, this is mainly the responsibility of richer countries that have already gone through a process of development and used up large amounts of the carbon budget already. But we're seeing leaders like Costa Rica and New Zealand, France and Denmark and many other countries, Chile, Colombia now, saying that they have reserves of coal and gas and oil and they're going to leave it in the ground. but they will only leave it in the ground if they have a viable alternative. So there's a big challenge for funding. How do we, as funders, UNDP and others, raise the funds to make sure that there's a viable alternative so that people's rights to energy is protected? Because they're often not locked in to oil and coal and gas. They want just the rights to energy, they want jobs. So we need to construct viable alternative pathways that can help them do that. But it does mean shifting patterns of production and consumption and the way we live. As Gandhi once said, there are enough resources to meet everyone's needs in the world, but not everyone's greed. And that's the problem at the moment. Those of you who were at the session yesterday saw the graphic I presented where you saw the 1% of the world's richest people vastly over-consuming the global carbon budget and consuming more than the bottom 50% of the world's population. So clearly we have to address those inequalities. My next point is about building allies, precisely because climate change is related to food, water, human rights, and gender. That creates an opportunity. It's a challenge, of course, but it's also an opportunity to build allies with movements working on those issues so that we can start to work together to tackle some of these very complex problems. Because climate change is a trade issue, it's a human rights issue, it's a gender issue, it's a water issue, all of these things. And so there's clearly choices to make for Bodoland, for Assam, for India, for the world. And these are deeply political choices. They're about trade-offs. They're about making, balancing risks and benefits. And we need to think about these things very explicitly in justice terms, I think, in the ways that I've been describing. And I think you in this room, going forward, as you go out into the world after your degrees, have a great opportunity to be the eco-warriors or the environmental defenders that are critical to building a more sustainable future. So once again, I wish you all the best in that endeavour. And if there's any role that people like me from the outside can play, then that would be a great thing. But really, my sense is you don't need external people like me to come in and suggest solutions and ideas. I think the ideas are already here. They're all over the place. It's just a question of how we source those, build those, and scale those. And I wish you all the best in trying to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. You remind me of one debate during my college days. One of the speakers in the debate, he spoke very well and at length on the topic in hand. Finally, the judge made a comment that you spoke very well, but I didn't understand half what you're saying. Obviously, he was talking about the accent of the speaker. And unfortunately for me, he comes from Britain. And it's very difficult, be extremely clear. Also, I am definitely lucid as far as the audience is concerned. So from what I gathered, it's a joke. I mean, it's not taking it. From what I gathered from what you said, is that he wants us to move away from a climate of despair. It's very difficult for a person like me to do, but I think that should be the right message to follow. He wants us to go away from the climate of despair because he still believes that there are multiple solutions to the problem. He has also again brought up in extremely brilliant fashion the complexity of the issue in hand, as also the various facets, the various avenues that are open. But he wants us to be more optimistic than we might be. He also wants us to look at the problem in a holistic view. I think that also is extremely sensitive. And he does believe, and I think that should be something that all of us should believe, that there are still ways of mitigating the issue. Anyway, I'm sure you'll have, as members of the audience will have, lots of questions to ask them. Now I call upon Dr. Om Katri from the Royal University of Gujarat. Please give your statement.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, organizer, for this wonderful opportunity. This is my beautiful campus, and all of you are welcome to visit my campus in Bhutan. So, just to start with, I think we don't need to debate on whether there is climate change, whether it has impact on climate change, what climate change is doing. I think that is a long gone debate, and we all agree that climate is changing. There are a lot of evidences on things that Newell points out that we need evidence, and then to generate evidence, I think we can generate evidence from different perspectives, using social sciences, different ideas, different methods, using quantitative, whatever methods we are well aware with. And Madam Anamika also points out that this is also an issue of injustice associated with development failures and lack of sufficient mitigation adaptation. And one of my professors used to say that if climate change can be solved with one discipline, a couple of experts, for the last 30 years, what are we doing? If one or few people can solve the issue of climate change, then it would have been already done. And today we would be in a very good environment, very good planet without the issue of climate change. But then it is so complex that we need to understand from different perspectives. We need to bring different disciplines, different sections of the society. We need to understand the different dynamics of, whatever we call it, power relations, whatever the resources at hand, the resources at stake. And these are the things we need to look at when you talk about climate change. And if you just look at, I'm afraid I may not answer all the questions, but I'd like to talk about very, very local level, trying to connect the Assam and Bhutan at our level. And if you just look at statistics at the South Asia, more than 70% of our people in South Asia are farmers. And one of the sectors that is hardly affected by climate change is the agriculture. And when agriculture, in terms of weather change, in terms of climate, weather change affects crop yield, weather change affects the plant growth, and then climate change affects the quality of soil and so forth. And with that, what happens is when there is no food to eat, when there is no money to earn for the livelihoods, people will migrate, and that is one of the issues. What they call, sometimes people call as climate refugees and something like that. There are so many terms that are related to this kind of issues. And just look at this. If you want to look at the hard data, look at this photo. Last 100 years, ma'am also mentioned that the average temperature increases 1.1 degrees Celsius. And then, but if you just look at the last couple of decades, in the recent decades, the climate change, the temperature increase. The temperature increase since 1990s, you can see is about 3 degrees. And this is average, by the way. And one of my students in the class, what he did was he boiled the water, he measured it, and exactly after 1 degree rise in temperature, he put his hand and then he tells me that it is not so hot. Why should you worry about climate change? But then, if it is a global temperature, 1 degree Celsius, and then that is the average, and that average comes from a lot of computations. And if you look at the heredity, it is really alarming. And then, if you just look at this, the mean annual temperature increment in the last, 2010 to 2019 average temperature increase, you can see that there is a trend, upward trend going up. Another one, look at this highest temperature recorded in South Asia, about 50 degrees, 53 degrees Celsius. I can't imagine living in that kind of temperature in that environment. And that is the temperature that we are experiencing in South Asian region. And look at this natural hazards and disasters from 1985 to 2009 in the recent years. People might argue that no, there is more technology. It is the record of these events are more, so we can see more. It is a different perspective, but I would argue that this data comes from as early as 1970s, and they have been recording this, and they found that there is massive increase in natural hazards and disasters. And look at this, the glacier change in one of the, this is in Bhutan, this study is done in Bhutan, and this is at the upstream area of, there is a river nearby which is known as Sunkos. And Sunkos, my university campus is exactly at the upstream of the Sunkos, and Sunkos is right here if you travel a couple of kilometers away from here. And that, the upstream area of the Sunkos is this one, the data shows that the glacier is decreasing significantly. And there are lakes forming, and the danger is that these lakes, when they burst, they come down, and then it come down to this area, Bodoland University, and I don't know what will happen. I'm not going to speculate right now what is going to happen with that. And now that brings us to the discourses. Are we looking at administrative boundaries? Madam Manambika also mentioned that is it right to look at, or can we make progress looking at the administrative boundaries? If we are breaking, let me say this, as human beings, we break the ecosystem boundary. Ecosystem has boundaries. It functions, in its own way. And as human beings, we build the walls and break the boundaries, and then we fragment the ecosystem into so many, parts and pieces. And what happens is this ecosystem doesn't function properly, and that is one of the reasons that we fail in adaptations and mitigation. It doesn't work. It has to be river basin level. It has to be at the ecosystem level. And look at this glacier at the South Asian region. You can just look at that black dot going down, that glacier cumulative mass balance. That also talks about a lot of stories, what is happening with the glaciers. And this is just a illustration of what would happen when the glacier melts. You can see that the floods and flash floods, the outbreak of the glacier lakes coming down, and what that will do with the downstream community. And these are some of the simulated changes in climate drivers in Bhutan and South Asia. And all of this you can see, they say increase, and then if you just look at winter snow, the occurrences of snow in the next 30 to 40 years is going to decrease significantly. Now, these are glaciers. This study comes from Ishimode, and you can see a lot of Ishimode. And then if you just look at that map, the yellow dot, which is marked Thimphu, and below that, down the border, right above the Brahmaputra River, that is where we are right now. And there are rivers which is coming from up, and you can see that this side, right below the 90 degrees, you can see that river basin is the Punasangsu, and down it comes, and then it becomes Sunkos in Bhutan, southern Bhutan, and in Assam it is known as Sunkos, and that is where we are. And these red dots are the rice fields in Bhutan. You can see the fate of the rice fields in Bhutan is already predicted that in future, this may not be there. There is shown if the trend of temperature increases 3 degrees, 2 point something degrees, then that is going to disappear in the near future. And this one, we looked at what are the different extreme weather events in the last decades or so. The frequency and intensity of these extreme weather events has been increasing, and this is adding another layer of uncertainties to the region. Similarly, there are 2013 to 2020, and then you can see this. My own His Majesty the King is actually visiting the flooded area in Bhutan. And if you just look at that one last year, November 2022, flash floods has actually killed so many lives in Bhutan. And when you look at this different data, different images, and then sometimes people ask, do we have enough data? And I wonder, what causes climate change is greenhouse gas emissions, and what causes greenhouse gas emissions is the entities and organizations and agencies, people who have actually consumed a lot of natural resources, exploited a lot of natural resources. That increases the greenhouse gas emissions, and the countries which have low resources, which they personally did not cause anything to the climate change, they are bearing the brunt of climate change impact. This is another, incident in Bhutan where farmers have just, harvested the rice, and then the next year there was rain, and that is what the farmers have to bear. And I said, if you just look at the migration data, because of these different impacts, different incidences, the people migrate, and migration is not a desirable outcome. People migrate because of so many reasons. And one of the difficult things is that migrating, going out from their own village, forgetting the place of God, breaking from their belongingness, that is the difficult thing they have to bear in their life. And then the session climate justice. Then what can we do with the climate justice? I think the climate justice is very basic. This addresses that the distribution of the negative impact of climate change and the disproportionate burden that the people have to bear. Those who are not doing anything, and then those who have done so much to cause climate change. How can we address this? So, and who should know what is climate justice? Every one of us. We need to know this, that we need to understand that different people, different sections of the society need to come on board. They need to express how they are adapting to climate change. And then with that, there are different principles of climate justice. And one of the things, there are so many principles, but one of the things that my professor used to say, and I would like to share this here, I quote, there are good news and bad news. The good news is that if you are looking at the old people, or who is about 25 people right now, then that's good news, because this person that you are looking up to will soon disappear after the next 45 years of this. And by then, the world's almost 60% of the resources is already exhausted. And the bad news is that then you will have to bear with it, and you will have to live with that uncertainty. Will you be able to adapt with that? Are you be able to ready to face that consequences? If not, then you need to look at climate justice. What is climate justice? We need to look at climate is caused not by everybody, but everybody bears the brunt of climate change. And then if someone is flying at the luxury plane, and if we ask this person to reduce certain emissions, and if at the household level someone is not having food at home, but if we just ask reduce the emissions at home, is it right to reduce ask people to reduce 50%? How can we do it? I think these are the questions that I'm not an expert in that one. Probably we need some discussions, and then experts can come out with something. So one of the things in that our countries has signed these different conventions, laws, treaties around the world, and one of the experts said that it is easy to go and attend a meeting and talk about being a leadership of climate change or environmental protection, but then do nothing at home. Is that right? As a human being, conscious being, we are the conscious being. We can think what is right and what is wrong. If we can just apply that principle to ourselves, and when you go and talk about good things and do nothing at home, is it the right thing to do? So that's the argument that they put it. And then state's responsibility, right to survival, access to water, access to food, access to health, these are fundamental things that all of us need. And if the state is not providing in the name of resource constraints, I think the state has to have some responsibility in providing access. Another thing is, as I talked about, transboundary environmental damages, for example, air pollution, water pollution, these are not, they do not need visa to enter one country to another. So we need to also look at what the country is doing in terms of addressing these issues. And way forward is that, maybe I'll just reiterate again the point, why not we look at ecosystem perspective? We are breaking the ecosystem boundaries and we need to understand the boundary of the ecosystem and not really look at administrative boundary to look at issues and come up with the solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Om Patel. Here also welcome the complexity of the issue, and more significantly, we have not only talked about the impact of climate change on agriculture, but we have also given the examples of the adverse impact of climate change in Bhutan and the Northeast. And which we should have listened more to, but unfortunately the time factor is against us. So now may I ask Mr. J. Arthur,
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, I'd like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to be part of this Knowledge Festival. It's great to be back in Bodoland, where I started my some professional engagement way back in 2017 on transboundary waters. We are working in a river called Saral Bhanga, which is next to the city. And always, I'd like to also thank my friend Raju Narjari, who is the Executive Director for Nursewin and one of the leaders behind this Knowledge Forum for this great initiative. I have a small presentation. So I will start with just to kind of put it into context in the BTR is a lot of the experts have already shared about the global context. We have seen the climate change graphs and the reports from IPCC, which Professor Anamika was sharing. But I will try to make it more useful and context specific to the Bodoland territorial region, and I think that is important for this knowledge forum. As many of you are from this region, you know that this particular geography is very unique. 1/3 of the region is covered with forest. There are a lot of wildlife sanctuaries. You might have seen these stalls from the Forest and Environment Department, rhinos, tigers, elephants, you name it, and it is in the BTR region. And most importantly, transboundary rivers, like Om was saying, a lot of the rivers that flow from Bhutan to India are in this region. And we are just discussing before the session began as to how many rivers are there. And unfortunately, till date, we don't know the exact figure, how many of the rivers and streams flow from Bhutan to India. So that's definitely a gap, which I will try to focus on in my subsequent slides. Agriculture, it's definitely one of the region's main economic activity, paddy cultivation. So that is again, as somebody was referring to, agriculture is one of the most climate sensitive sector, more vulnerable, and a lot of people depend on it. And that is the whole issue of climate smart agriculture, as Peter was referring to. Energy, most of it is definitely from the thermal sources, but definitely there is scope to go for clean and green energy sources, which the chair was also referring to. So this is the kind of context which we look into as we go into the discussion. So I will focus on a couple of solutions. The first one, from my perspective, is that of information. Information is very critical when we are talking about climate change adaptation or climate change policies. The science of climate change, like the International Panel on Climate Change, the authentic reports that come through various scientific institutions, the science of climate change is absolutely clear. There is no sort of second thought on saying that climate is not changing. Climate is changing. But how are you going to make use of that information at the very local level? And I think that is very critical when we are talking about climate change adaptation in the BTR region, because this is this is kind of a state within a state. So we have subnational governments, for example. This is part of Assam. Assam is part of India. So how do policymakers in BTR, are they able to use the climate information that is coming from IPCC? I doubt. So most important thing for us is to simplify that information, and I think making it more accessible to policy-making institutions and leaders. Another element related to information is misinformation. There is a lot of misinformation. We often call it greenwashing in the name of climate change. So that is something we need to be very careful of when we are talking about the information at the local level. As far as climate change impacts are concerned, it is very important to identify who is vulnerable, which sector is vulnerable, and what are their kind of sensitivities or exposure to different climatic hazards. So I think that information needs to be generated at the local level, and institutions like Bodoland University, IIT Guwahati, and others who are already in the state of Assam, they can take a lead in bringing about these kind of scientific interventions and information and making it accessible and usable to the policymakers. So that is my first suggestion on the need for localized information, localized climate information when we are talking about climate adaptation or mitigation. The second important point is on institutions. Quite often you will see like climate change is discussed and deliberated as an environmental resource, as a green cause. But things have changed, and now it is becoming more like the key thing when we're talking about the politics, talking about the development issues or the economic choices that we are making. So how do you ensure that our existing institutions that govern most of the development aspects are able to take into account the climate change impacts, are able to internalize some of the climate risks that are going to impact the development investment, the kind of infrastructure choices they are going to make. So this is an important area, and this is where I feel like BTR or the Bodo Territorial Council as a unit could demonstrate very effectively how they are using the climate information and designing their development policies and investments taking into account the climate change impact. So this is an area where I strongly feel that PTC is very well placed as a governing body to demonstrate as subnational government taking climate action. So that is more about the institutions. The third important point is on infrastructure. When we talk about climate change mitigation or adaptation, we need to have a lot of infrastructure in place to protect us from these kind of climatic hazards, whether it is drought, whether it is flood, whether it is heat island effect in many of the cities that we are living in. So we need to build in those infrastructure. And when I talk about infrastructure, it is not just the physical infrastructure of bricks and mortar and cement, but also the ecological infrastructure that is very critical. I think Om was referring to ecosystem-based solutions or ecosystem-based approaches. And the region is because it is endowed with so much of natural resources. We have forests, we have wildlife protected areas, we have rivers and water resources. So this BTR region is definitely going to showcase how best we can use ecosystem-based approaches as part of the larger climate change adaptation and mitigation options. So that is definitely an opportunity for the council to look at in terms of climate adaptation policies. The fourth point is on cooperation, and I will not go into it because a lot of the speakers they have already shared about it. Transboundary cooperation is one thing because Bodoland territorial region is next to Bhutan and we are upstream Bangladesh. So most of the things that is happening here is directly or indirectly linked to both things happening in Bhutan and Bangladesh. So that element needs to be considered when we are talking about climate change and climate adaptation policies. But most important thing about this cooperation is the interdepartmental cooperation that needs to happen. Quite often, as I said before, environmental issues are mostly within the environment division or, for example, state pollution control board. But I think there is a growing realization that to tackle the complex issues of climate change, a lot of the departments need to coordinate, and most importantly, the finance department, because the money matters, and that's my fifth point. In order to do all these things, we need finance, we need additional resources, because we have to take into account a lot of the future climate risks. So how do you mobilize the additional finance that is important for climate action? Without finance, most of the things we cannot do. So for a subnational government like the BTC, I think there is opportunity to look for innovative financing like green bonds, which is very popular in India these days, and also to look for additional finance from the climate finance perspective. I work in a program of UNDP. I work for UNDP in India. We work on a program of Green Climate Fund. So Green Climate Fund is an international climate finance which supports climate action by government. And this is an area where BTC, again, I'm coming to BTCs because I strongly believe that the political leadership in the BTC, which is very open to new ideas and green causes, I think they are very well placed to mobilize these kind of financial resources through international climate finance and also green bonds. So these are some of the points that I would like to highlight, these 5 key elements. My next slide, I just would like to spend a couple of minutes highlighting specific areas where this climate change initiative could be taken up in the BTR region. Water is definitely one, which already many speakers have referred to, so I will not go into it. Agriculture, climate smart agriculture, and making it more the sector because it is being highly sensitive. How do you make it more climate resilient through various innovation practices, including that of the reduction of the greenhouse gases, making it more water efficient and energy efficient. So that's an area we can work. BTC can work with other institutions, agricultural institutes, and international funding agencies. The urban part, I think that is a very important aspect which I'd like to emphasize. I understand that Pokrajhar city has already been awarded a couple of sustainability awards in the past, and that's a very good thing to know about. But as we move forward, as the city is growing and there is a lot of infrastructure investments happening, it is important that the city considers the urban risk elements into its design and planning. And that is where, again, the urban and planning department of the BTC can work in terms of making the climate smart or the climate resilient city planning in the BTC region. Forest and wildlife, this is another area where a lot of initiatives could be taken up from climate adaptation and biodiversity conservation perspective, and things are already in place, or maybe we just need to bring in the climate adaptation element, and this is where communities can get a lot of resources, their capacities can be built in terms of working through the various adaptation initiatives. The last one is more about the planning and coordination, but here I would like to emphasize the role of the youth, and that is very, very important because all these things related to climate change adaptation or mitigation, a lot of it is related to the behavioral choices that today's youth are making. I have been to many conferences and initiatives where they say youth is tomorrow's future, but I don't believe that. Youth is today's future, and they are already doing a lot of things in today's world, so they are today's leader. And I think this is an area where the BTC can work with organizations who are working on capacity building of youth on various climate issues, whether you call them climate leaders or green warriors. It is definitely an area where we can mobilize a lot of positive interaction, not only among the youth of the Bodoland region, but connecting them with, for example, youth group in Bhutan or youth group in Bangladesh, so they understand the whole spectrum of issues and how climate change is not something which is very localized to one city, one region, or one country, but it is a larger issue of the humanity. So with this, I will stop and thank you once again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatta. You have very wisely and pertinently you have dealt with this specific need in your talk. You have talked about the uniqueness of the economy of the world, filled with forests and rivers. You have also made emphasis on the importance of information and the making this information accessible to the policymakers. And I think in that respect, I think again our young generation can play extremely important role. We have also talked about avoiding misinformation. And at the same time, we have highlighted the role of an institution like Boroland University in both imparting and making accessible information to the policymakers as well as preventing misinformation. Thank you. Next, I will ask Dr. Dhruv from to present
Thank you, sir. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, yesterday I spoke at length about initiatives on waste management in Assam with a new directive in a new regime, which I say that this year, 2023, is going to be a really watershed year in Assam because never before so much of budgetary allocation was given for all types of waste treatment and actually getting work done by multiple agencies in Assam. We in the Pollution Control Board of Assam are really committed, and we have a special now cell being created for taking care of 104 urban local bodies. Their problems of solid waste management, separation, segregation, fecal sludge treatment, etc. Besides, in Dibrugarh, very soon we're going to bring out the first transfer, storage, disposal facility we call TSDF in northeastern India. First time it will be there in Dibrugarh Lakai area, which is coming soon. So, along with the directives of Honorable Supreme Court of India, National Grid Tribunal, and the MOEFCC, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, we are also facing a crisis. Yesterday, if you remember, I told you 85 to 90% of the solid waste are collected by NGOs from door-to-door collection. But when you actually see in the field, about 38% of that is being treated. Where is the rest going? It's a $1 million question. So, climate justice in action is easier said than done. When there has been no climate justice or climate action, now it's a sort of new terminology being used. I tell school children when I go to their place, why, when I came inside your school, why did you put the placards, say no to plastic? If I say no to plastic, what do I use? I try to provoke them. And the children say, sir, there are alternatives of plastic. We can use minerals, we can use metals, we can use paper, other alternatives. I say, do you know, to print one Sunday edition of London Times, 24 acres of land worth of trees in a land, 24 acres is spent. Do you know, when you try to bring out iron, aluminium, copper, zinc, so on and so forth from the earth, how much harm you do to the earth? You create, God gives us for millions of years. I use the word God in a metaphorical sense. Don't take it as such. Nature has given, nature is God actually. 15 inch of soil we call topsoil. And in one day you just cut it and bring the minerals out. And later on, when the mining is over, the companies, they will proudly say, we have made the land okay. We have filled the land back again. We have renovated the whole area. You cannot do it. All the 18 nutrients for basically required for plant to grow, what is called topsoil, is not given back like that, but putting soil from the earth, cutting from the hills and then just filling up the land. So dear friends, environmental justice is now what we see, an American-based movement challenging disparities or risk exposure and access to benefits. Sustainable development, everyone knows out here. We have been told about sustainable development for a long time. I'm glad I have a friend from Bhutan. Before King Jigme Singhi Wangchuk in 1974, maximum scholars in the world only told about ecology, economics, and equity. Everyone. We have the triple bottom line formula, we have the Atkinson's models, we have the pyramid model, egg model, you name it. I taught in engineering college for 25 years, and this was our subject, giving different models of sustainability. But in 74, the whole paradigm shifted, and the king of the small princely county called Bhutan, he gave the whole world an idea. If happiness is not there, satisfaction is not there, what will happen is only with ecological justice, economics, and equity. Everybody, every citizen of a country should go back to sleep at night with satisfaction, with happiness. So happiness index came later on. Lord Meghnad Saha and Thomas Wackernagle, our Amartya Sen, they worked on these principles and they gave us the theories of happiness index and other things. That's why you find small place like Costa Rica getting #1 position, not America, Germany, or Japan, with lots of technology and lots of riches and resources. Index has changed. And then gradually we came to circular economy, and now we are talking about environmental justice, environmental action. Climate justice consists of climate crisis to the social, racial, and environmental issues. This we all know, but we should remember. In the USA, they say BIPOC countries, BIPOC communities. That is basically black, indigenous, and people of colors. And their concerns are never heard when people make policies in the Senate or the Parliament. Same thing happens here as well. Coming back to my story of the school, top class school in Guwahati City, when I told them that spending paper, digging the earth is more risky than making plastics out of something hydrocarbon which already has been done. Already oil well is there in place. ONGC, Oil India, other companies are bringing the oil hydrocarbons out. From that, we take a particular cut and we make all these polyethylene, polypropylene, polybutylene, and all these polymers, plastic polymers. No longer to freshly go for mining of any resources. Plastics come from that. In 1930s, it was supposed to be water material with the earth. Oh, people are so happy. We can replace the heavy metals. We can replace the paper. Plastic has come to us. And suddenly that we found that we have gone in a way where the development is not sustainable because we don't know what to do with the plastic after we use it. I asked the children, how often do you change your refrigerator at home made of plastics? Sir, 15 years. Fan, 10, 15 years. Your specs, which is also perspex, is basically plastics, type of plastics. But very few times in a lifetime. So it is not the same with the carry bag, which you carry a bread or some potatoes or some fish for the market. Try to classify these things and then come to the conclusion. You may differ with me, but ladies and gentlemen, I say we are incapable of managing our plastic waste, and therefore we are talking about zero to plastic. Then many children next year, they came to me, they met me in my office and say, sir, we are now going for judiciously saying what is to be adopted and what is to be discarded. That should be the principle. Climate justice is also much more than wealth transfer. In many places I hear, I read wealth transfer between nations, funding. My previous friend, It's a partner. Rightly said, funding is required. Yes, Assam Pollution Control Board may be having lofty ideas and plans, but we cannot do anything unless we get funds, right? Fund is to come from somewhere. But the point I again try to make is that the basic understanding, the sense and sensibility, these are equally important. After all discussion and debate, we come to the conclusion that climate justice ensures proper representation, inclusion, protection of rights of the most vulnerable. And this is also one point which is flagged by earlier speaker. Who is most vulnerable? Who is most vulnerable? In the Eastern Himalayan regions, Sikkim plus 7 states of Northeast, 8 states, we are all contiguous states. We have run a program 10 years back, not today, 10, 15 years back, under Ministry of Science and Technology, how to make these people more climate resilient, how to give them teeth, how to give them, empower them to take decisions they want, what type of crops to grow, which type of plantation will keep the soil in place, and so on and so forth. Imposing things doesn't help you. Today, debate is being made on like coal mining. Coal mining. Yesterday night, I spent with all the management of Bogagaon Thermal Power Station in Salakot. I stayed there at night till late night. We were discussing about the problems of power generation. USA said 2050 carbon neutral. China 2060. India 2070. Question is why? Why we are lagging 20 years behind US or 10 years behind China? Because even today, 55% of country's power comes from thermal power stations. In spite of your stupendous achievement in making rooftop solar, floating solar, and whatnot, tidal energy, wave energy, etc., nuclear is already there. We have seen our Lower Subansiri project languishing for last 12 years. Same country, Bhutan. In my childhood, when we saw people from Bhutan carrying sweaters and jackets in Fancy Bazaar market area, we knew the winter is coming. Same country, the king told the local people, don't go to different countries to sell your sweaters, stay here. Go for exotic type of orchids and fruits plantation, will make power. One country in the world which is power surplus, which sells power to India is Bhutan. Sir, in 2006 and 8, I have personally gone to your Sutha, Tala, Gedu, all these projects and seen how beautiful they have managed the ecology environment. They are also hilly terrain. They are also earthquake prone, but still they have managed scientifically the projects and they are now very well off. So climate justice, climate action is not just a sort of bookish concept or some essay or some seminar conference topic to be delivered upon. It starts from zero, ground zero, and then it goes down and up. My last comment is, it basically refers to ensuring that environmental transitions, we are in the transition phase now, typically at the level of a country or a region or a sector, like I told, coal mining. Coal mining cannot stop in India. Take it from me in writing. Coal mining cannot stop in India. Wherever, in whichever state mining has stopped, people are in dark. Huge power cuts. And then also people will shout, students are going to examination without power. We don't have power at home. Industries are stopping down. MSME sector is affected. So it's a matter of catch-22 situation. Where are you? It's a catch-22 situation. Therefore, at small level, village level, panchayat level, town level, city level, we need to make our own micro plans. We need to develop our societies. May not be same as Kokrajhar, may not be same as Bogaigaon, may not be same as Silchar. Last week I was in Silchar. Silchar is a different terrain, different problem altogether. So, for every society, every place, we need to develop this type of small plans for mitigation of the problems and to ensure that development, environment, ecology all merge together. We have to pay a price always for making 7 flyover and 1 bridge construction in Guwahati. We are paying the price by AQI of 300 plus, 400 plus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mishra. I wish, since you are the director of the pollution from you are the chairman of the pollution control board. I wish you had spoken slightly more and enlightened us about the kind of steps you have been taken. Uh, well, basically, right now I have come from Guwahati. I am being suffocated by the kind of pollution that is used. But here also, spoken about the work being done in formation. And also he has very rightly and very coherently shown the complexity of the problem. That if you try to solve the problem in one way, and the problem arises in another way. So here, out of the reality, there is no simplistic solution to any kind of problem. Now, last but not least, very late. Can I ask you? Important. Minutes of wisdom.
Thank you, Pulumbai. I want to, after such a excellent presentation, referring to the macro picture, I just want to come down to the Northeast region to be able to share my concerns. Because I have traveled in this region over the last 30 years as an investigative journalist. And I came to the Bodo areas, for instance, in 1983, and I've kept coming back and covered other parts of the Northeast. So, as other speakers said, I also want to say that Bodo land is in a unique position today because of the very strong constitutional protections that have been given to you under the 6th schedule of the Constitution. The rest of the Northeast, many states have Article 371, and these are things that the rest of India does not have. The communities in the rest of India have no say, and our forests, our resources have been wiped out. And it is being done by government and commercial interests. But here in the Northeast, you are the last bastion left of biodiversity, which is only 3 hotspots left on the planet. It is in the Indian subcontinent, it is the Northeast and Myanmar belt, the Himalayan belt, the Andaman and Nicobar belt, and Western Ghats. So the convergence of communities asserting what you want to be your master plan, I think is going to be the key. And you have the backing and the constitution powers to do it, and you must have the confidence to use it. We in the rest of India, our survival actually now depends on you and learning from you the wisdom that is there in your communities. Right now, the evidence shows that climate change is a reality in the Northeast. We see a clear trend of rising temperatures, change in rainfall, there is more floods and droughts, the mindless building of dams and roads that are causing up drying up of springs and rivers, destruction of forests, and biodiversity by commercial interests. New pests are being seen as also insects. Biological changes where tropical plants like mango are growing in cold places like Arunachal, which has seen a temperature change. So this is where your opportunity lies, in using the powers that you have got. And in my travels in the Northeast, some of the amazing things that I have seen, look at your own cultures. In the 1980s, when I did studies in Nagaland, Mizoram, and Manipur, you saw how water sharing in agriculture is something that has been practiced here for centuries. rainwater harvesting for domestic use, long before rainwater harvesting became a buzzword in the rest of India. The micro ponds of Kikruma, that was another incredible wisdom of community management. And the jute cultivations that I saw, the use of alder plantations within jute. These are highly scientific and well-managed community use of agriculture. The control of the fires which have been done by the community. Now, Indonesia, for instance, has been much reviled. The tribals have been reviled and being told that you are destroying the forest, you are destroying the wildlife. But actually, it was the commercial interests that took over and started plantations in Indonesia, and that has destroyed the biodiversity, and it has had a huge impact on food security, local food security. It has led to a lot of land grab. There are impoverished farmers, and there are unaccountable communities. This is the international evidence we are seeing from Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, Africa, and some of the Latin American countries. So I particularly want to focus on, just very briefly, on palm oil, which is coming to you in a very big way from the central government. 11,040 crores have been allocated by the National Mission for Edible Oils, palm oil, by the Modi government. And it is specially targeting the northeastern region and Andaman Nicobar Islands. And I don't know who is advising Mr. Modi to do this, because this is the last biodiversity region and so important for the survival of our planet. So who is guiding Mr. Modi with this kind of information? And I think the Northeast communities must speak up. You must say to this government that this is not part of our master plan. Many people here in the Northeast are accepting palm oil cultivation. You see it in the Rabha areas. As I passed here, I saw many palm oil fields. But from what I've understood, the farmers are attracted by the huge cash subsidy that is coming with this national mission. There are promises of infrastructure that are being given to you. But what is the reality? Do you know what is the downside of palm oil from the experience of other areas, internationally and nationally? And I think you must study the impact of palm oil, particularly that is now emerging from Mizoram. The recent issue of Caravan has an excellent investigative article by a Mizo young journalist called Kini Kolmi. Please study her articles, because that is going to be the story of palm oil in the northeast of India. You are seeing impoverished communities, you are seeing infertile. After 10 years of palm oil experience in Mizoram, the only northeastern state to have this experience so far, people are finding that their land has become infertile. The companies that are promising to do a lot of things and are legally bound to do so have not delivered. There are a lot of problems that Mizo community farmers are now facing, and we need to learn from their very tragic experience. There are promises of getting rich quick, but I think there are huge consequences for the planet, for future generations. And what is going to happen is that with the degradation of your soil, with the absence of infrastructure, you're not going to get the profits. You do not have infrastructure. And palm oil, for instance, once it is harvested, it has to be milled within 24 hours. Now, where are the roads in the interior villages that is enabling 24-hour movement of fresh fruit palm fruits to the milling sectors? These are the kind of constraints that the mesos are talking about. And this is 10 years later, despite all the promises. So this is where we need to begin to think about what is our master plan for development. And so I just want to briefly touch upon this because there are many people who want in the rest of India who are biodiversity conservation scientists who would like to think with you what are the laws that are there in biodiversity laws that enable you to protect what is left. The third thing that we need, so you need to look at the downside of what is happening, not just with palm oil, but with cash crop cultivation, with monoculture plantations, and look at what is the downside and what is the price you will have to pay when you go into this get rich quick syndrome. The second aspect is the laws, the biodiversity laws that are protecting the Northeastern Andaman and Nicobar. What is it that you must do to protect your biodiversity? And the laws are there. There are lawyers who will help you to figure this out. And the third aspect is livelihood. What is the alternatives that we are going to give our young people? They too have aspirations to have a mobile phone, to educate their children, to have better quality of health and a better quality of life. Now, how do we meet their aspirations? So this livelihood issue, I think, is going to be key. And it is bureaucrats who sit in Delhi who think up livelihood plans, but they are totally off the mark. And they're not listening to local experience and not listening to local communities who have a wealth of experience. And just sitting here in this conference, I was talking yesterday to somebody who talked about IIT collaborating to build humidifiers, drying machines, so that your agricultural produce has better shelf life. That is the kind of technology we need. And somebody else was talking about water hyacinth just outside Guwahati, which is being used to create yoga mats. Now that's the livelihood options. They are small options, but there are a wealth of experiences that we need to look at of people who have been experimenting all these years to look at what are the livelihood options. And the last thing I just want to say is, from my knowledge of covering public health and development issues and having some international knowledge, I just want to say that we need to look at the experience of sub-Saharan Africa, which teaches us so much because they are further along that trajectory of development, of so-called development. And in these countries, they went into mass coffee cultivation as a cash crop under the guidance of the IMF and World Bank. And when they went into coffee cultivation, at that somewhere along the line, the prices crashed internationally. And when that happened, the whole economy went into a spin because they were, by then, local food security had been undercut. There was a lot of import of food from outside. So people did not have food and there were food riots. And that meant, unstable social impact. There was a political impact and economic impact. And then, so many years down the line, there began to be a health impact because people were not getting the nutrition that they needed. And therefore, you started to see diseases like Ebola, Marburg, AIDS, and a whole line of diseases that Africa has been associated with. And that is a consequence of development, that is coming to communities without a master plan that they need to be asserting and politicians need to be listening to. So I hope I've been able to communicate my deep concern for this and the concern that many of us in the rest of India have about this issue and how can we support you, how can we get this knowledge and information together so that we can influence our policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kenan. I think she hit a very important point. That is, much of the Northeast has constitutional protection. Now, Borough also, to some extent, does have constitutional protection. And he says that you must use that protection to protect your environment. The Northeast is a global ecological hotspot. And the people of this region, he asserts, must do their bit to conserve this ecology. Because, to some extent, they do have constitutional protection, including the sixth schedule. Now, she has also spoken about the danger that is coming, looming ahead of us, the danger of the palm oil thrust that this government is making. Now, I have stayed in Indonesia for quite a few years, so I have seen firsthand the highly deleterious impact that palm oil cultivation has made in, say, Sumatra or Sulawesi or Kalimantan. Especially the kind of adverse impact this palm oil cultivation has done to the orangutan habitats. Now I am horrified that the center is trying to make the Northeast one of the hubs of palm oil production. Yes, that presents a clear and present danger to this region, and our young people, our young eco-warriors must do their bit to resist this kind of a thrust. Now, thank you all for listening so patiently for such a long time. Now we have around 15 minutes. I request the audience either to voice their opinion or ask any questions they have, which are distinguished panel of speakers. Only one caveat, don't ask any questions to me. Anyway, please go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. I have a few questions and a comment. My first question is to Mr. Patra. He laid out certain suggestions for the PTR to implement. But from my understanding, the suggestions that he has put is more or less a normative suggestions. Interdepartmental, cross-sectoral, upstream, downstream. But I was trying to understand what are the, repeatedly those suggestions were to be contextualized in the PTR region. But I could not, I think it's my problem that I could not understand the precise anecdotal applicability of those suggestions. For example, when you talk about the how we have to be aware of Bhutan and Bangladesh with regards to water resource sharing. But how can we apply with regards to PTR? We need example, anecdotes or examples so that students or common people like me are able to relate. Normative statements, the same suggestions I feel can be applied to the entire world. That is first comment, anecdotes and the examples are a few. Secondly,
Let me finish my question, sir. Second question to sir, the director of the Pollution Control Board. Chairman, sorry. Sir, you really put up really hard-hitting questions and practical questions. I have a question for you. The question is that, so when you talked about idyllic Bhutan, you visited Gedo, hydropower plants, and praised. I suppose that deserves the praise. The model, happiness model of Bhutan, and also you, as a passing remark, mentioned about Amartya Sen's model. But I think Ambedkar Sen debated between the capability approach and the happiness approach. So I have a question for you. The question is quite direct. I think while talking about the beauty and the idyllic hydro plants of Bhutan, you have forgot to mention about the displacements and ecological impacts of what Bhutan's developmental projection has done. And I would like to ask from you.
We have got your point.
And I would like to thank ma'am who's brought about real life examples from palm cultivations and how relevant it is for us to actually take these examples and learnings so as to have a proper developmental trajectory understood by the youth and the people of BTR. Thank you.
Thank you. I think these are very important points you raised, and I really appreciate your focus on looking for examples. And definitely, that is one of the things that we should be doing as we move forward from this forum. One specific example of some national government taking strong climate action is the government of Tamil Nadu. It very recently come up with a clean climate vision on its own, not from the central government support. And through that, they have identified very sectoral priorities for climate action, including establishing a fund called Green Climate Fund, which is very similar to GCF. So this is an example of a state government which is doing things on its own in terms of mobilizing climate finance, ensuring interdepartmental coordination. So I would encourage you to look at the Green Climate Mission of Tamil Nadu as an example. And as we move forward, I think this is where the BTR, in partnership with universities, institutions like UNDP, we could deep dive into some of those issues that we have identified. For example, how can we make it more context specific? So I think I answered your questions. Thank you.
You didn't mention your name, whatever it is, anyway. The environmental damage and loss in biodiversity in Bhutan's entire mission of hydropower generation is minimal. Nowhere in the world before Bhutan, we saw or we heard, we read about 23-kilometer long tunnel made in Sukha power project, which was underground, cutting across the hill, but the hill was not disturbed. Not a single plant or any other things growing on the hilltop was displaced. It's an engineering marvel to be seen. A gentleman called Mr. Khajansi from Central Water Commission, Government of India sent him to Bhutan to head the hydropower generation mission. And you'll be surprised to say, whatever I have seen, Punachuchu, Kurisuchu, or Sukha, Tala, Gedu, all these places, wherever we had gone, or later on also our people from our college, university have gone to see. It is not like the destruction or devastation that we see in other type of hydro projects. Those projects have been made in only such places where population is sparse. That's an advantage in Bhutan. You don't have huge population or density in those places. That's an advantage. Same thing doesn't apply if you go for a project in Uttarakhand, Assam, or Uttar Pradesh, etc., etc. So, to answer your question, when I take steps anywhere, I walk down here, go to that field, go to my vehicle. When I step and when I walk, even then, some ants, some creatures will be killed. Nothing comes free. Biodiversity loss is a concern, no doubt about that, but at the same time, development also must take place. Yesterday, I was telling a story to my friends that when in 1997, Medha Patkar was almost a demigod in India. Delhi University students paid their pocket money to her movement, Narmada Bachao. He used to put a very blue sweater with white wool on the backside written, Save Narmada. That same lady, when she came to a national level function, I was the All India Secretary of Children's Science Congress, 1997, RI campus, Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh. Entire Gujarat team walked out of the auditorium with the teachers and students. I didn't understand what is going on. I was new to the politics of Narmada and Madhya Pradesh. Chief Secretary S.C. Behar was sitting next to me. In chaste Hindi, he told me, "Beta, आपको घबराने का जरूरत नहीं है. आप बैठे रहो. इनॉग्रेशन फंक्शन हो जाने दो. गुजरात के बच्चे आ जाएंगे. 4 दिन का हमारा कार्यक्रम है. वो लोग भी यहाँ हिस्सा लेंगे. बाकी बच्चों के साथ पूरे देश के. लेकिन जब महिला पटकर यहाँ रहेगी, वो लोग नहीं रहेगा. अब तुमको क्यों ये हो रहा है? मीटिंग के बाद बताऊंगा. चीफ मिनिस्टर आया था, चला गया. बाकी सब लोग चले गए. SCB had told me, dream of Sardar Patel to irrigate Gujarat, give a proper drinking water, make power. Only hope was Narmada. MP has got many rivers beside Narmada to take care of their power project. For Gujarat, it's only Narmada. So this lady was opposing the entire project. Everything was standstill. Suo moto case was there in like Supreme Court of India. Later, much later, when reposing the faith in Thabo Beki, his deputy, Nelson Mandela came out and became the chairman of World Commission of Dam under UN. Then only he solved this problem. Said, Vera, you have to accept this particular thing. You can't keep other state people in darkness. Gujarat, if she had gone at that time, 1997 December to Gujarat, any part of Gujarat, she would have been killed there, murdered there. Whereas in the whole country and the whole world, among youth and other people, she was a demigod. So every story has got two sides, my dear. If you have to develop, you have to sacrifice somewhere, but that sacrifice should be minimum, right? Therefore, Bhutan, biodiversity loss and nature loss and displacement, I don't accept.
Thank you. I also beg to disagree with you because every monsoon, when a dam, certain dam, I want to say, hydrated project, releases water, our downstream population suffers huge losses. So, but obviously, this is not the proper forum argue on that point. So, we will have, I think, time for one more question. Simply one more question, please. Yeah. Yes, please come. Please state your name and don't take too long.
Myself is Dr. Pranay Kumar Aditya. We have bullet question. It is very nice to see a cluster of learned and expert people here. My question is to the forum, to the chairperson, your assessment about the aspect of recent reports in Kashmir, lithium ore is of huge amount, which is reportedly 3 times that of China and enrich a lot to Indian economy. Now, what is your views or comments? If it is really extracted from Kashmir, what will be this action? How can do or compromise with climate justice? Thank you.
Well, you know, it's a very huge mine, basically. Primarily because lithium is used for electrical batteries, to put it very simply. And if you are going to, what you call, change our power sources into electric, okay, from electric vehicles and other appliances, which are going to use non-polluting source of energy. You can, with lithium is very important. And I think it is going to help reduce our dependence on countries like Australia, I think also Venezuela. Venezuela also is currently supplying us with lithium. Anyway, thank you all. patient being such patient listener. If you have any questions, you can personally come and inflict yourself upon any of the members of our panel. But for the time being, we thank you. We thank you for the university. Thank you.
I thank all the participants for being here and listening to this panel discussion. Now, may I request all the guests to join together for a photograph. We'll have a photograph session.
কি
ফটো উঠাব নেকি?
এটা দিয়া দিলে এটা বড়
All of you, please come over.
Nisan, oh Nisan.
কিমান ফটো ল'ব লাগে হা বেছি ওলাব ঠিক
वो maybe अपने में अभी हूँ I will inform you ना whatever
Ready?
ഇത് কাম কৰিব লাগিব